So Donald Trump, I'm not even sure if it's right to say double down, because I think this is like triple or quadruple down when it comes to his plan for Gaza. He not only has said that he still intends to pursue it, which I think every day that he continues with that, I think is a win, at least on some level. But also in the recent interview with, and I have a name here somewhere. I had it somewhere.
Brett
In a
Baier?
Yeah, thank you. In a recent interview, he also said that there would be no right of return, basically saying he doesn't just want to sort of relocate Palestinians sort of temporarily, but basically permanently build cities or build settlements or build whatever else somewhere else, and basically don't have any sort of automatic they'll be back in 10 or 5, 10, 15 years or whatever. Before I go to you guys, I think we should let's watch the clip so we can actually have something directly to comment on. It's not long, so let's see.
We'll build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
Spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them. Because if they have to return now, it'll be years before you could ever. It's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen. I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt. You know, we give them billions and billions of dollars a year.
So in almost typical Trump fashion, the way he talked about it, why would they even want to come back? Why would they even want to come back when we will build beautiful cities somewhere else? But I'll go to you, Michael. What do you make of both the fact that Trump is still sort of going on with the idea? We'll talk a little bit later if it's just a game, but for now, let's just say that this will happen. What do you make of his sort of this new development, basically saying even basically if it does happen, no guarantee that Palestinians will go back to Gaza, even if it gets rebuilt?
Right. Well, the first thing I think, and this is words from Trump and his group, his cabinet, is that one of the definitions of insanity is to continue to do the same thing over again and expect a different outcome. And anybody who thinks that any deal with Hamas or the Palestinian Authority or Islamic Jihad or any of the numerous Islamic militant groups in that whole area will amount to anything that will lead to any kind of civilized state is either a complete fool or lives on a different planet. I mean, there's simply no other way to define this. There is not a single business that would have succeeded if they continue to have this kind of philosophy over time. There's not a medical procedure that if it failed this long over how many years, how many decades, you would continue to do. There's nothing in life that would compare to the people going back to the table with Islamic militants and trying to do the same thing over again. That's point one. Point number two, as you look at Gaza, it is pretty much, a lot of it is a parking lot, as it should be. The war was started with Israel. When Hamas started it, they expected the world to stop Israel. Israel didn't stop. They didn't go in there the way they should, but they didn't stop. And there is nowhere to live in Gaza. And as Trump points out, there's enough mines and booby traps and just stuff, damaged stuff and projectiles and metal and nails and everything that it's uninhabitable as it is. And the notion of pitching up a bunch of tents in the area while construction's going on for the next 5 to 10 years or whatever it's going to take is obviously absurd, because you just can't do it that way. They've got to wreck everything. They've got to demilitarize it. They've got to get rid of all the munitions that haven't been exploded. I mean, this is the stuff that we as lay people know. This isn't even the details that the people that are in the armed forces are really aware of. So everything Trump says in this regard makes sense. these people, if you do believe they deserve a home and a place to go, then you need to move them to some place where you can construct something that's relatively safe and can be done fairly quickly and doesn't require a full demolition and a cleaning. It's almost like a waste site there. I think it's terrific. I think he's sticking to his guns. No one's come up with a better plan. And the views of the Arab nations and Turkey and this sort of thing, like, who cares? Who are you to start talking about this, and why anybody gives a damn that Erdogan has anything to say about it, or frankly, anyone else? This should be between Israel and Hamas. And since the US decided to finally jump in and do the right thing, which is to support good, this is certainly the best option that's been put out there that doesn't basically pretend that Hamas is suddenly going to become civilized. So I think it's terrific.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, Hamas doesn't have a seat at the table. We don't invite, after we beat the Nazis, we didn't invite them to the table of saying, okay, how are we gonna figure out this situation? No, you started the war with Hamas or with the Palestinians. It was multiple times, and we'll talk about that later. You don't get a vote anymore. Now, before I go to you, Marco, I'll bring up one more thing. Trump, during the interview, was also asked if USA will accept any Palestinian refugees. And I think he sort of said maybe on some individual cases, but pretty much he hasn't committed to anything. So what do you make of, we still pretty much don't really have a clear vision of where they would go. But what do you make of both potentially some of them going to America, going to neighboring Arab states, and potentially even somewhere else?
Well, personally, I think it's only right that you consider the case on an individual basis, because you shouldn't have a blanket, every Palestinian comes to Britain because why? Because of Palestinians? That would be a racist approach to the immigration, wouldn't it? But going back to what you were saying about, of course, if you want to make Gaza beautiful and safe, you have to get rid of Palestinians. Palestinians are terrorists, and the few who are not active terrorists are actually terrorist enabler and supporters. So Palestinians in Gaza mean either they have to learn to be civilized, or it's not going to be beautiful and certainly not going to be safe. The interview itself, well, because he was talking over himself and over the guy who was asking the question, probably didn't really understand that the guy was actually asking for the right to return. First of all, because the scheme up to now is on a voluntary basis, so that in itself is quite a downer. But I don't think
let me jump in on that, because I was thinking if I should bring up the possibility, because there is such a thing as the right of return, and whenever it's brought up, it usually means sort of Palestinian refugees around the world having the right to sort of go into Israel proper and become Israeli citizens. So he might have been instinctively reacting to that, but I like the other alternative better, that basically Palestinians will get kicked out of Gaza, will never come back. So I'm sort of going with this, but there is a slight possibility that basically he just was thinking of the other thing.
The whole point is that they're not going to be kicked out. It's on a voluntary basis, so that's not going to happen in the first place. And I think he was actually answering, would they want to come back? And from his answer, it looks like that's what he understood, because he then said, no, they wouldn't want to come back because what we're going to give them is something better. But besides the plan or whatever it's going to be the future for Gaza, the important thing is that the U.S. administration is going down regional cooperation. So it's involving Arab states in order to accommodate the Palestinians. He's talking to Egypt, he's talking to Saudi Arabia. And yes, these are not the kind of states we want to have a permanent dealing with, because they are dictatorships or theocracies. However, to solve this problem, to take in the Palestinians, they need to be playing this particular game. You can, as Michael was pointing out, you cannot keep going down with the illusion of the two-state solution, which never going to work. So you need a fresh approach to this, and this is hopefully the beginning of a new approach. As for Gaza itself, well, there isn't much in Gaza right now. However, we still have the Israeli hostages that were taken October 7th. Those are already there, kept by the Palestinians, kept prisoners, and we see what kind of condition they're kept. We seen on Saturday when the three were released, what kind of condition they were. So we cannot trust the Palestinians. We cannot trust Hamas, which is a declared terrorist organization recognized by lots of countries as terrorists. So, I much rather take what Trump is suggesting as getting rid of the current threat in the form of the Palestinians, or at least changing the nature of the solution, because until now it hasn't worked, does it?
Before I go to you, Richard, I just want to bring up one more thing. Basically, sort of the idea of why would anyone want for Gazans to stay in Gaza, as Michael brought up, with the amount of sort of unexploded ordnance. I think there are many places around the world. I think big one is like the former states of Yugoslavia, where you still have like mines like at different places, basically as the remnant of the Yugoslav wars, and that's what happens. You have a lot of this stuff, and the people who would want for Gazans to stay there are people who don't really care for Gazans, only in terms of their sort of political goals, meaning when Palestinians are out of Gaza, they can no longer be used as a tool against Israel, as something to fight Israel in perpetuity. So no Arab states want anything good for Palestinians besides them being used as terrorists. But yeah, Richard.
I'm struck by the same thing. I'm struck by the fact that all the bleeding hearts across the world, whether they're governments, whether they're individuals, whether they're people on the streets of London or New York, who have been decrying the fact that Gazans have been living among the rubble, suddenly want to force Gazans to return to the rubble and live among the rubble and nowhere else. I mean, that seems, because why? Because they want them to be the eternal victims. And the purpose of the Palestinians is to be eternal victims and to spearhead the all that follows on behind that in terms of the demands across the world in all different places, and on those demands frequently being for money, of course, from Western governments in the form of aid and in the form of support for all the different affiliate organizations across the Western world. So there's certainly that for a start. And then on Michael's point about who cares what the Arabs think and what Erdogan thinks, well, I totally agree. But of course, I also know that were anyone other than Trump in the White House, the US administration would have cared what the Arabs thought, and this plan would have already been swept away like a fly off a windshield, and we would be back to where we were, talking about fantasy land of two-state solutions and trying the same thing again through just having friendly chats over a drink of orange juice with some Arabs, and therefore ensuring that everything works fine in the future, which is obviously not going to happen. So all of that is in there. Plus, of course, when you look at any Trump interview, there's always the sense that it's very hard to unpick it, isn't it? Because you don't know whether he's intentionally vague. You don't know whether his language is loose so that he can wriggle out of what seems like a promise one moment and can be rebadged later on, or whether he's got a loose understanding of what his own plan is in the first place, or whether it's all of those mixed together. But either way, whatever the core of that is, the point is that this is shaking up the whole thinking, and this is making the Arab states across the Middle East unable to use the previous playbook, which has worked for so many decades in the past. And this is therefore changing the dynamic there, which is the only way that we're going to move this on from the Groundhog Day that we've all been sitting in for forever.
First, we have a super chat from Bulmus. Thank you so much. He sent me a message saying if the Palestinians are spread out to other countries, they'll just radicalize and set fire to them. It would make sense to occupy and de-radicalize them the same way we did Germany and Japan. So sort of what is the right... My biggest worry when it comes to actual occupation of Gaza is that I don't think Israel wants it, and Israel would even handle it. Israel tried to occupy Gaza in the past, but didn't have the sort of willingness, the same sort of willingness we had after World War II, with both Germany and Japan. So I think that's sort of the biggest thorn in sort of that plan. Now, in a sense, I think it would be a better solution. Now, this idea that they would be radicalized, I mean, similar to World War II, after there were millions of Germans exiled from Czechoslovakia, from Poland, from Soviet Union, and again, we sort of figured it out. It was like, if there is willingness, if we recognize the evil that has been committed by Palestinians, by Hamas, and we understand the nature of what needs to be done when it comes to the radicalization, we can do it. But the West has no willingness to even understand what's wrong with Palestinians, what's wrong with current culture. We still think of Palestinians as innocent victims of Hamas instead of the people who have supported and still support Hamas. So I think any like different plans can work if you understand what is the core of the issue and how are you going to tackle it. But if you don't have it, it's almost like no plan. Like you could say, well, we tried occupying Gaza, but we had no idea why we were there. We had no idea Israel had no idea what it was really trying to do, and therefore it couldn't crack it. It couldn't really do it, but it could have done it earlier, a few decades ago, the first time it with the creation of Israel, when it had a big amount of Arab population that had to live under military occupation until they got their citizenship. So Israel was able to do it in the past. But yeah, I mean, Michael, what do you think of again, like the idea of occupying Gaza? It's something we have been calling for, but it's not the plan we have on the table. Sort of the only thing we have right now is what Trump has said, because Netanyahu has pretty much never said what his plans are for Gaza. And when Trump said this, Netanyahu was sort of just
well, look, yeah, I think it's super important to at least with my understanding of the Israelis' view about occupation and their philosophy of it, and I believe they are frankly naive. And I don't think they have the moral clarity to go in and say to a people, you will change or you will be put in jail, which is effectively what the US did in World War II to both the suicidal regime in Japan. And as I mentioned many times on this show, remember, they were flying airplanes into our ships. They were kamikazes. They are suicide bombers, very similar to what you see here, except, of course, the Arabs are happy to blow up civilians, and the Japanese were much more focused on military targets. Obviously, the Germans were more than happy to exterminate people, primarily Jews, but gypsies and lots of other groups, homosexuals and so on. And we basically told them, you are going to follow our dictates. You are going to become Western. And guess what? They did. Both of them did. Two of the most despicable, horrendous human entities in the history that we know of. Nazi Germany and the Shintoist Japan under the emperor turned into flourishing Western democracies, which are strong and contributory and wonderful countries now. And the reason they did is because the US back then, which maybe it's getting it back, but it certainly under Biden-Harris didn't have, was absolute moral clarity that the Western way is the right way. And you will demand, when somebody loses a war, you will demand that they behave your way, or we will continue to demolish you and annihilate you. And if you don't get in line, just like every other criminal, if you don't get in line, you're going to be killed or jailed. And that moral clarity has been lacking from the US since World War II. We haven't fought a war like that. We haven't fought a war to win. Israel, for many years, fought wars to defend itself. They were winning, and then the world stopped them. So I don't know what to say about Israel in terms of fighting a war to win, because they always were stopped. This war in Gaza, I don't believe Israel started it to win. I don't believe it for a second. I don't think most Jewish people in Israel believe that. And until they get moral clarity, they will never be the occupiers. My point is, you cannot occupy a country. You can't and expect any kind of thing good unless you demand that they move to your way. The US spent probably trillions of dollars between Afghanistan and Iraq, and somehow expected to people that are basically uneducated to adopt democracy with sort of this gentle touch. We're going to help lead them. That is not how you establish things. So I don't think Israel can actually occupy Gaza. I think it would have to be somebody else. If it were another Muslim regime, that would exacerbate the problem. So you're basically stuck with a Western entity, or you move the people out of Gaza so as to remove the immediate terrorist threat to Israel, which is what happens when people lose a war. They have to move. And that's okay. And there's no right of return, just like there's no international law. It's all made up baloney. Okay. And you do what you have to do when you win, and you stop apologizing for it. And this moral clarity is what is needed. And last thing I'll finish with, Trump for I think this term of Trump so far has shown leadership both internally and externally with a lot more clarity than Trump won, and certainly more clarity than the Obama and the disastrous Biden, which was probably really Obama 4 years, and frankly, much more clarity than the Bush years and even the Clinton years, about saying America is an amazing place. Western beliefs, progress, human flourishing are important, and we will do what it takes to get to that end and not try to pretend that behaving like a 2nd century BC Muslim tribe is going to lead you to a place in this modern world.
Marco?
Yeah, I think more than this interview, what's really important is what President Trump said after the release of the hostages on Saturday. Seeing the condition that came out, he actually said that the patience is running out, and how long we can, I don't know how long we can take this. Mentioned the fact that the hostages came out emaciated, and he said actually they look 25-year older. So this, together with what just happened, that Hamas has just issued a note, a communique saying that they suspending the release of the next hostage, the next phase of the deal that was in place, suggests that perhaps Hamas are either miscalculating or not coordinating themselves very well. But if they go down this route, hopefully we're going to see the end of Hamas, because President Trump is not going to be a dilly-dally Democrat. He will give carte blanche to Netanyahu to go after them and get rid of them once and for all. I'm pretty positive that's going to happen. And if they keep playing the victim, for example, in the press release that they just came out with, they were saying things like, "Oh, some of the terrorists that have been released from the Israeli jails, we had to take them to hospital because they were poorly." Well, they clearly are gaslighting us, trying to divert the attention on the fact that they were treating Israeli hostages from October the 7th as slaves, and they're treating them very, very badly. That's why the situation, the condition they came out of in the way they did. So,
Go.
Well, it's just that they're trying to play the victim. They're try to make you think that Israelis are bad, and they got nothing to be blamed for. The same old Palestinians, the same old Hamas. We've seen this for 80 years now. They will never accept the fact that they are responsible for every single thing that's happened. And by the way, the only concern I have about moving Gazans away from Gaza is that they really ought to pay for what they've done. They really ought to be forced to reconstruct the thing that they destruct in the first place. The destruction of Gaza is a consequence of their own action on October the 7th. So if there's rubble now, well, they should clear it. They should rebuild. Fine, US administer the area or whatever. But I think the Gaza should actually experience on their own skin what it means to be on the attacking side, to invade another country, and you shouldn't just get away with it and having a better house at the end of it.
Yeah, and also when it comes to, yeah, I've also seen some posts of some of the Palestinian prisoners. I haven't been fact checking if it actually happened, but one of the person also looked sort of l- similar to, like, maybe he was I guess malnourished would be the perfect again, I didn't check if it actually were happened, but again, they are terrorists. Why, like, as far as I'm aware, these people should not even be alive. Why would I care that sort of when they were released? Like, the idea that you would compare hostages that were taken either from their homes or from a music festival, and then kept all like malnourished for 481 or so days, and you compare that to like a terrorist that have that the terrorist that has like taken those people into these conditions. I don't see in any way sort of equivalence between these two things. But yeah, Richard.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the state of the hostages, some of the things we've heard about their conditions in captivity, being chained up, being kept in the dark, forced to share like a single rotten pitter among a group of them, starved for days on end. You can see the evidence of that in their appearance on their release. And to attempt to equate that with how any Palestinian, notwithstanding what you just said, Daniel, no matter how any Palestinian kept in, an Israeli prison because they were behaving like a terrorist. And we know the extent to which the Palestinians and the Gazans use things like cancer or leukemia to pretend that Israelis are causing starvation and malnourishment in the Gazan population. We've seen that exposed before many times. So and of course we're talking about such a depressingly large number of Palestinian prisoners, criminals released. So, of course, the chances of someone having some form of, disease is higher as a result. I think when we return to what Trump was saying in the interview, for example, and of course he's partly wearing this hat of property development, even though it sounds like he's talking about the Florida Keys some of the time rather than Gaza. But this notion that that parts of the Middle East might have a stake in Gaza, or at least they might be, wanting to buy buildings within it or whatever. As I mentioned on a previous show, I do think there is some merit in exploring that possibility. I think that one of the difficulties you've got here is that if you rebuild Gaza and make it, however nice you make it, that the Palestinians down the line in the future are going to then, demand a claim back to it in its new fully rebuilt state, for which all you've done is reward terrorism. And of course, some future bleeding heart organization or the US administration down the line, when it's Democrat in 2 or 3 terms time or whatever, would be handing it back to them on a plate. And that, of course, is something that you need to avoid. And I don't know how the structure of how you set up the legal structure of the ownership of Gaza could be made to prevent that or lessen the chance of that. That's certainly a possibility. And then I just wanted to say a couple of words about Erdogan, of course, and the fact that we've been entertaining all these contradictions for so long.
We are just about to go to it if you want me to bring it up, and then I can
Fair
immediately
enough.
jump to you.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's cover. I have basically Hamas reactions, Turkey reactions, Russia reactions. So let's cover the Turkey specifically. Erdogan, he basically sort of rejected the proposal, or as he called it, the proposal to exile the Palestinians, calling for the reconstruction of Gaza to begin and for Israel to foot the bill. Now, I'm a little bit scared about the way he said it, because he basically said, we'll build it and Israel will pay for it. And I'm afraid that, like, Trump, will just, oh, I like that someone will build and someone else pays for it, and he'll like jump on it. Kidding. But sort of, so that was what Erdogan has been saying, basically, that Israel should pay, basically, it would be war reparations in this example, basically, that, which again, it's something the losing side paid. So I have no idea how you would even come up with the idea that Israel should rebuild it, like, for Palestinians. And he also said, no one has the power to force the Palestinian people to experience a second Nakba. which again, the sort of first Nakba was again Palestinians or Arab nations starting a war against Israel, losing it, and then suffering the consequences for it. And this is the exact same scenario. So I guess calling it the second Nakba is appropriate. And I'll just add, yeah, he basically called for Israel to pay 100 billion worth of damage. I'm not sure where we came up with that number, but yeah, Richard, you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, it's where everybody comes up with those sort of numbers, nice and round and very large. That's all you need to know. I think this failure to identify, who's the victor, who's the defeated, who's the aggressor, who's the self-defender, even at the end of the conflict, if this is the end of the conflict, is a testament to how poorly the morality has been laid out for people, and how badly Israel has been making its case, and how badly the West have been responding based on their own cultures as well, and the sad modern state of the Western world, in recent years. I think when it comes to Erdogan, of course, my point I was going to make was just that we've been entertaining so many contradictions for so long, and the idea of a two-state solution working when half the population would want to kill the Jews in the other half, and you pretend that that's going to be fine, and they're also the peaceful ones. Apparently, you've been entertaining that contradiction for ages. The contradiction that Turkey is in NATO. And yet has been saying what you just read out in terms of Israel being at fault for the war and being forced to pay for everything. And the point that Trump was making when it comes to Egypt and to Jordan about how many billions are given from the US, and using that as the threat to withdraw that, to no longer fund that. I think
just for context, I believe Egypt is like in top 3 of like recipient of foreign aid. I think I'm not sure if Ukraine has ever overtaken any of those, but it's Israel first, and I think it's Egypt like second or third, and not that far behind Israel, honestly.
Yeah. And of course, Turkey receiving as much money as it does because it's in NATO, and of course Egypt and Jordan, as we said, receiving the amounts that they do. That is something that does wake people up, and because it is Trump and not a standard American president from every other administration, we know that it's possible that he would actually follow through and say no, tomorrow, no more. And that is the only way that I think you can unlock some of these long-standing problems.
Just to add to that, all the Democrats predicted absolute disaster when Trump threatened Mexico and Canada with the tariffs. It was going to be the end of Chuck Schumer jumping up and down, showing that avocados and beer were going to skyrocket. AOC screaming about the cost of coffee because, after all, we only buy coffee from Mexico. Nowhere else can sell coffee. And lo and behold, both of those countries, within less than 24 hours, at least started to cave to U.S. demands, because we are the pot at the end of the rainbow. And if you want to trade with us, you better behave at least somewhat in our interests, as opposed to the Democrats who just love everybody taking advantage of us. And really, it's shocking. And I think as time goes on, the more and more are going to come out about this, how many of the positions that the U.S. has taken under Obama and Biden are contrary to American wishes. Of course, the Democrats will all say we're trying to appease people and make them our friend and everything. And we all know how that works. We all know how many people who hate us take our money very happily and then laugh at us and snicker about how they're going to use it to destroy us. So I think you've got to use the amazing American weight, both militarily and especially economically, to drive the changes that are necessary. And once you have a leader that is willing to stand up for what's right, the world will get in line. But you've got most of the leaders are spineless, and all they do is try to figure out which way the wind is blowing. Until you have someone who's willing to get up there and say what needs to be said, and we'll see if that continues with Trump. I'm hopeful, because it sure as hell went the wrong direction with Biden. or whoever was running the Biden White House. And we will see. But I think this could very well go in a very good direction and change the world for the better, just as destroying Nazi Germany and then having to drop 2 atomic bombs on the people that lived for the emperor and died for the emperor on Japan until they straightened out did. So I think it's definitely the right direction.
Yeah, I have to quickly jump on the tariff thing because I don't believe there was anything good about that, and even sort of the idea of again threatening even with the idea of like economic or military might of America and sort of to use it to sort of bully like smaller nations or not even smaller nation, our allies or American allies. I think it's a sort of really disappointing well, I expected it, so it's not disappointing, but sort of it's not like something that should be applauded it anyway. So just wanted to
yeah, but our
out.
ally, Turkey is not our ally. I mean, Turkey despises us. They despise Israel. They're not our ally. They're part of NATO. They shouldn't be. They want to get in bed with Russia, and they're already talking to them.
I'll just jump in. I meant specifically like Canada or Mexico. I mean, yeah, Turkey should be absolutely kicked out of like NATO. There is no even question about it.
Yeah, but and let me just add, if you're allowing fentanyl into the U.S. and the U.S. is screaming, and there's a lot of very progressive people screaming about how many kids are dying from fentanyl overdoses, and it's coming in from the north and from the southern border, then and the people on the north and the south are not policing their border, then they're not really our allies. I mean, you don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You got to pick sides here, and if someone is refusing, like Mexico refuses to stop their own people from leaving because they don't want their people in Mexico, and that's what Trump said. You will police your border. We don't want your people here, and we'll have legal immigration, and we'll stop these gangs from coming in, and we'll stop the drugs from coming in, and so on and so forth, and that's fine. But countries are doing things in their own best interest, not in their allies' best interest. I think the U.S. has been sorely naive and frankly, bluntly stupid about who's our real friend and who's not.
Yeah, but again, I dislike the idea that other countries are statists, so let's become statists too, so we can lead by example. I mean, we don't have to discuss this topic. It's sort of like a separate issue. I just I can understand. I'll just bring up a separate point to sort of like where I can sort of see it. Like when it comes to NATO, certain countries have obligations to NATO. Basically, right now it's provide 2% of your GDP should go to military, and many of the nations are not doing it. Now, I think the proper way of going about it should be Trump should basically come out and say, in 4 years, if you are not a nation that is sort of fulfilling these things, either you are getting kicked out of NATO or we are leaving NATO. I think that's something that should absolutely happen, but I would dislike like a different ways of like we'll put 100% tariff of you as long as you are not like it's sort of like finding a roundabout ways of like basically implementing taxes of your own people because a different country is like not fully fulfilling its obligation. I think when there is a problem, you tackle the problem like as directly as possible. You don't like find like a roundabout and sort of like more statist ways on your own citizens to sort of like try to achieve that. So that's sort of, I guess, my biggest problem. But let's bring up a few more things because we also had Russia sort of commenting on this. So we have Dmitry Peskov, who is a Kremlin spokesman, which is Kremlin spokesman is like a title I would give to someone who spreads Russian propaganda, but I guess it's appropriate here. He has said that Palestinians had been, quote, promised a two-state solution to the Middle East problem by the relevant Security Council resolution, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of questions like that. We don't know the details yet, so we have to be patient. Basically, from as of right now, Russia has neither sort of rejected this idea or really approved of it. We'll have to see. But Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, has said that we have like certain promises towards Palestinians. Yes, there was a two-state solution. There was a UN two-state solution that the Arab nations have rejected and have decided to attack the other side, the Israelis, instead. Like you no longer have even whatever relevancy was even of that UN resolution, the idea that you would still sort of go back now after time and time again, Arab nations or later Palestinians have tried to wipe out Israel of the map. The fact that we would still sort of have like any sort of obligation towards that is, I think, simply laughable. But Marco, what do you make of the sort of Russian reaction to the plan?
Well, frankly, I've stopped listening to the Russians about 20 years ago. I mean, it's like a budget USSR nowadays, and they still think that they can wield the kind of geopolitical importance that they used to have. Well, Russia right now is just a failed dictatorship. It's losing a war against Ukraine. So it's in no position of actually saying anything against Trump right now, because they realize that they need Trump in order to get Putin out of the fire and back in the pan, because it's quite clear that Russian economy is falling off a cliff. Politically, there's not much left in Putin himself, and he really needs to strike a deal with Trump in order to be able to abandon the Ukrainian war without looking like the loser he actually is. And of course,
I'll just jump in on that because I'm not sure if we'll have a time to say it separately. But there was also announced that Russia would be willing to sort of accept the sort of peace with the plans it had originally, which would include Ukraine never joining NATO and Russia retaining all of its current sort of gains in Ukraine, which includes millions of Ukrainians, which again is like laughable that this would be even like I think at some point I might sort of accept, if we are not able to like push Russia out, that maybe like Donetsk and Luhansk sort of get lost and the rest of Ukraine like joins NATO. But the fact that both of these conditions would be fulfilled is like, again, laughable. But yeah, sorry, Marco.
I mean, it's all right. Just we were talking earlier on about how appropriate it is for Trump to behave like a bully. Well, we're in a mixed economy, in a world of mixed economies and dictatorships. So, and these people, the only thing they understand is actually somebody punching them on the nose. Certainly, the Arab dictatorship and theocracies don't understand anything apart from violence, and they demonstrate it more and more. Every time you deal with them, you realize that the only way of making them understand is actually to bomb them or punch them on the face. Putin is the same. He only recognizes force. The EU, economically, well, they're the biggest protectionist bloc in the world. They've been effectively putting tariffs on the US and all over the world all the time, and nobody's ever complained about it. They only complain about tariffs when it's Trump putting them in retaliation, or using them as a tool to push American interests. So this is a bit a one-sided argument in the first place, but the only way.
Well, okay, I just have to jump in. It's not in American interest to put tariffs on its own citizens or taxes on its own citizens.
It is the kind of mixed economy we live in. It is in a place where the EU, when they run out of cash, they start fining billions. Google or Apple or whatever American company happens to be on the high at the moment. They done that. They keep doing that. So, even the stupid regulations that they impose, like Apple no longer able to use proprietary connector, they had to provide a pan-European connectors. Like, this is all laughable, and they just do it because they know that it's a soft target. They knew until now that America would defend itself and would let their own companies suffer this kind of regulation. So they've done that. They behave like bullies themselves. So now hearing these people complaining about Trump being a bully, it's like, well, suck it up.
Yeah, but again, it's sort of like stooping. It's abandoning moral standard, pretty much. That's the way I view it. Basically saying, no, we actually don't care either. We're gonna be as statist as we're gonna match your.
I just don't understand that. What option does he have? What do you do with a bully? Do you go out there and talk nicely to him and hope he's going to change his behavior?
again, depends which bully we are talking about. If we are talking about Iran, you destroy it. And again, Trump says he will negotiate with Iran. And when you deal with Canada, you just complete free trade. You just do whatever. As long as they are a free country, like again, we are sort of like a standard should be freedom, not sort of like how are we gonna screw each other in a different way to sort of optimize the way we are screwing each other
But
over.
the trade balance with Canada between the U.S. and same with Mexico isn't equal at all.
Yeah, but that's like a mercantilist 14th century idea that is like.
But Daniel, I'll give you an example. Canada pays 1/3 of the price of drugs that they are in the U.S. because Canada refuses.
Because they force down the prices by regulation.
So let's be clear about it. They can afford to force down the prices because the U.S. basically funds all of research and development in the entire world, and every other country gets to negotiate the price of drugs. Sure, let the U.S. go and change the price of drugs. We'll cut R&D by 50% in pharma. It's okay. So we'll have half as many new drugs in the world. That's okay. Canada also restricts the number of drugs it has. And I'm giving you an example because I know this example well. We had this same problem with China that makes American drugs and ships them here and then threatens us every time there's a problem. They're going to cut off the drug supply here. These countries are not playing by the rules. Canada and Mexico included. They don't play by the same rules that we do. Sure, we do some things that are bad too. But I don't, and I disagree with Ayn Rand completely on this. I think she says she's objective, and I believe her, and I love the philosophy. But the notion that everybody's behaving objectively or our allies are behaving objectively and in a free way, I think is from La La Land, frankly. Canada is not our friend. Mexico, they're not our enemy. And they are our ally per se, although I don't even know what that means because we defend them, right? Mexico, what do they really give us? And it's okay. We're a good country, America, and we do have a lot of largesse, and we do believe that we should help out folks. But it gets to a point where come on. You know, if Russia comes to it, the reason Greenland is even thinking about being bought by America is because if Russia comes and takes over Greenland, the game's over. They're not going to have a choice. It's not like the European countries are going to come and defend them. It's going to be the US. So I think we need to start to be much more transparent about what's really going on here in the entire world. And I like being an American that helps out people. And I don't think Canada should try to take its rather, frankly, low GDP and spend it on submarines and armies and so on. I think it's great that the US does that. But let's remember, the US is doing that. We're paying the taxes for it. Same in Mexico.
I think sort of that's my understanding. And the way you said it at the start, sort of you disagree with Ayn Rand on this. So I agree with Ayn Rand on this. I don't think you fight sort of like, and I guess we can have disagreements apparently. I just don't think when it comes to, again, yeah, the fact is that many other countries have lower drug prices because they force down the prices by law, and most of the R&D is done by America. Now, again, I want America to be even more free because we see America is successful because it is free. And if we accept the standard of other countries, which means we are just going to be as statist as we can get away with, I think the greatness of America will fall. And I mean, if you bring up the example that maybe Canada and Mexico are not allies, I mean, if you want to make that scenario, then break off all relations, have no relations with those countries. I mean, I don't believe we should have relations with statist countries. And if you can make that case for any European nations or any sort of even neighbor countries, I think you can make that case. And same with, as I've said, NATO. If you should straight up say, okay, if you guys don't want to spend on defense, all right, bye NATO. The idea of NATO is dead at this point. But sort of America is getting something out of it. America is getting the sort of the world being sort of the world leader by sort of having the defense. Now, if you want to use that world leadership to bully people, again, I would disagree with that. Anything to add, or we can go
Let
back?
me just throw in
Sure.
just a couple of words, just to say that NATO, I think, has been ludicrously exploiting the US and the weakness of the head of US administration again for decades. And I think the one thing that Trump was able to do in his first term was to get some people to properly pay up. And the head of NATO at the time recognized that he'd done the biggest amount for increasing NATO's budget in a single announcement than anybody had been able to do for ages. And I think that will only continue and should continue in the second administration coming up. I mean, I think there's merit in a discussion about this whole tariffs issue, because it's a separate, show at some point, because there's a lot to it. And I think I mean, our knowledge, as Marco hinted at earlier, is more related to Europe and the EU in terms of free trade and their protectionist nature, because it certainly sticks in our craw the extent to which they're treated as though they're a free trade bloc and advocates.
Well, it's a free trade bloc, and then protectionist outside.
It is and it isn't, and even that needs heavily unpicking, because even that is a piece of horrendous propaganda when you look under the hood. But as I say, probably a separate show, and it would be good to highlight some of those areas for sure. Just to return to the Middle East, just in, as we're heading towards the closing minutes, maybe. I mean, certainly for Russia, obviously you shouldn't pay them any attention whatsoever. I would treat them like that fly on the windshield that I mentioned earlier, quite honestly. And I mean, yesterday in the Daily Objective, I heard Alex talking about the extent to which this was a war. It had been treated like a war on buildings, a war on architecture by Israel, as if blowing up a building, solves a problem. And I think they're in danger of talking about the peace, just to build on her point, and a durable peace being simply replacing those buildings with shiny new buildings and shiny new architecture and a lovely riverfront. And that is just, that's no more a solution than the first thing was either. So it's quite clear that the people, the ideology, as we've said many times, is the issue. Where geographically or where in, which particular town people live in is not relevant compared with the ideology they support, particularly when it's a genocidal ideology that wants the Jews dead. And of course, that's what must be tackled and must be, they must be made to give up that ideology. Otherwise, in the future of the planet stands no chance, so long as we keep going round and round over repeating this issue. There we go.
There were a few more things I wanted to cover. There's one sort of big problem that's coming up, and now has been sort of made even into a bigger problem, with Hamas saying they will basically not release hostages on Saturday, or will postpone it, or whatever we'll see. Is I believe starting this week, there should be negotiations about the second phase of the deal. Now, I think we'll have to do a separate episode on that, as well as I believe tomorrow, Israeli cabinet is supposed to reconvene, basically talking about how they will look at the second phase of the deal. So it might be better to talk about that on Tuesday or Wednesday. But with that, and also something I should bring up since I haven't mentioned it, it looks like Palestinian Authority has ended their pay to slave program. So apparently this was something that was being done already during the end of Biden administration, and they have waited with announcing it to sort of like appease Trump, or sort of like have like a something
what
like,
a
oh, look, we've
What a concession. It's like, Saudi Arabia, women can drive now. They'll put that in the same category. Wow.
So we'll definitely bring that up also at some point. But since we're out of time, Michael, any last thoughts? And also, where can people find you?
Yeah, look, the notion that Hamas is reneging on the agreement, it's only, as I've said, only Anthony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, could be surprised that a terrorist would renege on an agreement. Point one. Point two is that the remaining hostages clearly will have worse health than the last three hostages, and likely there are not that many that are left alive, and not the least of which is the Bibas kids, which is a sort of emotional focal point in Israel, probably beyond any logical way of thinking, but a huge point nonetheless. And it was pretty clear that this was going to happen. I think on this show, we've talked about how bad an agreement this was. It's great we got back some of the hostages. I personally think it was not worth the long-term risks because we let so many terrorists back in, and they'll just, they're going to go back to what they do well, which is be terrorists. And they'll be even better at evading capture this next time. So I'm not surprised. I also don't think that what Israel was going to demand in the second, this second negotiation was going to be anything that Hamas was going to agree to anyway. And I think that people are making a lot of noise about all of this, but I think ultimately this is doomed, and Plan B is going to have to come into effect. I think Trump was already alluding to it yesterday. He said that he was getting very antsy and anxious about things. Michael Kaufman with 2 Fs. You can find me on LinkedIn.
We also have a super chat from Bull Moose. Thank you so much. And he actually said the PA is also suspending the pay for slay. Now, I should just remind, if someone doesn't know, it's basically what PA, Palestinian Authority, has as a sort of welfare system. If you kill Jews, you get rewarded. If you die in the killing of Jews, your family gets rewarded. So that's the basic idea of it. And both Hamas and Palestinian Authority practices it. But Marco?
Yeah, if you get convicted, actually, you don't have to die in the process of killing Jews nowadays. So, but it's nice to hear the PA actually admitting that I have this kind of anti-Israeli policies that's been around for ages, and people kept saying, "Oh, it's not true, they don't do that." Well, they're the kind of monster that do this kind of stuff. So, get over it.
You can find us on the Briefly Objective, the short form videos that we make based on the chats on this channel, the conversations on this channel with added visuals. There are details in the description below if you want to check it out, and please like and subscribe to as many videos as possible.
And of course, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, thank you guys for joining me, and bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.